The wind on the Montana plains wasn't just cold. It was a scalpel. It cut right through Claire's coat, right down to the bone, trying to carve out the secrets she kept buried there. Her boots crunched on frozen dirt. Each step was a small, defiant noise against the roaring silence of the plains. She told herself she wasn't running, but that was a lie she'd gotten good at telling. Every mile she put between herself and St. Louis was a breath of stolen air, and she knew, deep down, that stolen things always have a price. Ahead, the town of Willow Creek was a smudge of smoke and weak light, a promise of warmth, a promise of shelter. But for Claire, promises were just traps waiting to be sprung. She'd picked it for its size. Small towns meant fewer eyes, fewer questions. But small towns also meant strangers stood out. And Claire was the strangest thing to hit these parts in a long, long time. She needed a job. She needed a place to disappear, a place where the face in the mirror could finally stop looking over its own shoulder. She walked into the general store, and the smell of kerosene and old leather hit her like a memory she couldn't place. The faces that turned toward her were hard, weathered by sun and suspicion. She bought a little flour, a little salt, feeling their eyes on her back. She paid, her hands steady, and walked back out into the biting wind. And that's when she saw him. He was a tall man, built like he could stop a charging bull with his bare hands. He was loading a wagon, his movements sure and strong. But it wasn't his strength that caught her eye. It was the sorrow. It hung on his broad shoulders like a second coat, and on the wagon seat a little girl sat watching him. Her face was bright, but her eyes were old. She'd seen things a child shouldn't see. The girl saw Claire first, a whisper to her father. He looked up. His eyes weren't just guarded, they were assessing, weighing, like he was looking for a tool or a weapon. "Needin' supplies?" he asked, his voice like rocks grinding together. "I've got what I need," Claire said, her hand tightening on the satchel slung over her shoulder, the satchel that held everything she was, and everything she was running from. The girl piped up, her voice clear as a bell. "Pa, she looks like she can ride. You should ask her." The man, Caleb, shot her a look. "Hush, Emily." But a flicker of something crossed his face. Not interest. Calculation. Claire started to walk away. She didn't need this. Didn't need the complication of a broken man and his watchful daughter. But as she moved, a coal scuttle clattered off a nearby porch, spooking the wagon horse. The big bay reared, eyes white with panic. Before anyone could move, before Caleb could even drop the sack of flour, Claire was there. She didn't shout. She didn't grab. She just stepped into the chaos, her voice a low, steady murmur. "Easy now, boy. Just noise." Her hand slid up the horse's neck, finding the pressure points, calming the animal with a touch that was too practiced, too confident. The horse settled, blowing hard, its ear twitching toward her. The street had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Caleb hadn't moved. His eyes were narrowed, not with gratitude, but with a sharp, sudden focus. He wasn't just looking at a woman who could calm a horse. He was looking at a woman with a very particular set of skills, and he seemed to recognize them. Caleb tipped his hat, a slow, deliberate motion. "You made that look simple." "It isn't," Claire replied, her voice flat. She stepped back, putting distance between them again. "But it's not complicated either." He finished tying the reins, his knuckles white. "You said you've got what you need. That still true?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Because," he went on, his eyes boring into hers, "I could use someone with a steady hand." Emily, the girl, jumped in again. "Pa, she could help with Bluebird. The mare bites everyone since." She stopped, biting her lip. Since what? Caleb's face was a stone mask. "I run the High Meadow Ranch. I need help. House and barn both." "What kind of help?" Claire asked, keeping her satchel between them like a shield. "Governess for Emily," he said, the words sounding strange in his mouth. Reading, sums, a hand in the kitchen, and with the horses. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, from her worn-out boots to her wary eyes. It's a lot to ask. Sounds like 2 jobs, Claire said. Maybe 3. There's wages, he said, ignoring her jab. Room and board, but I don't hire strangers without a trial. This was it, the moment she should have walked away, but the look in his eyes. It wasn't just a rancher looking for help. It was a man setting a trap, and for some reason, Claire felt the desperate urge to walk right into it. Then don't, she said, turning to leave, testing him. Emily's face crumpled, but Caleb's jaw tightened. Sometimes Winter doesn't care if we've been introduced. You have a way with a nervous creature. That counts for more than a reference letter. He knew. He had to know something. Claire thought of the cold boarding house rooms, the locked doors, the constant fear of footsteps in the hall. A ranch outside town meant isolation. It meant work so hard your body was too tired to let the nightmares in. It meant a place to watch the road. What's the trial? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. A week, he said instantly, like he'd had the answer ready the whole time. Start today. Books with Emily till noon. Then help me with a fence line. If you're worth your keep, you stay. If not, you leave with a hot meal and your pay. He was making it so easy. Too easy. Terms, Claire stated, not a question. A separate room, with a lock, and I keep my own hours after supper. Caleb nodded, a slow, unreadable expression on his face. Separate room, with a lock, one rule, no whiskey around the girl. That suits me, Claire said, a bitter taste in her mouth. I've had my fill of what whiskey does to men. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, or something else. I'll fetch you in an hour, he said, turning back to his wagon. Finish your business. As he climbed up, he paused. Your name? The question was a physical blow. A name was a key. It could unlock the past and let all the devils out. Claire, she said. Just the one word. The one she'd chosen. The safe one. Miss Claire, Emily said, trying it out, a small smile returning to her face. Miss Claire, Caleb echoed, his voice flat. He flicked the reins, and the wagon rattled away. Claire stood frozen on the street, the cold seeping into her bones. An hour, a trial week, a room with a lock. It wasn't a job offer. It was a challenge. She turned and walked back into the general store, straight to the man behind the counter. Mr. Cutter, she said, her voice low, tell me about the Becketts. The old man looked up over his spectacles, his eyes shrewd. Caleb runs hard, pays fair. He paused, polishing a glass. His wife. She passed 3 winters back. Fever, they said. He stopped and looked Claire dead in the eye. Funny thing about that fever. No one else in the valley caught it. A chill, colder than the wind, ran down Claire's spine. The telegraph in the corner office started clicking, a frantic metallic heartbeat. A stranger had come to Willow Creek, and Winter wasn't the only thing watching to see what she'd do next. The ride to High Meadow Ranch was silent and tense. Caleb didn't speak. He just drove, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he were expecting trouble. Emily filled the silence, a nervous chatterbox pointing out landmarks, but Claire noticed the girl kept glancing at her father, watching for his reaction. The ranch itself was tucked away, protected by a line of old willows. It was isolated, defensible. The thought came to her unbidden. Caleb led her inside. The house was clean, tidy, but it felt preserved, like a museum. The air smelled faintly of lavender. You'll take the back room, he said, his voice clipped. Emily's across the hall. My room is at the end. He pointed to a door. There's your lock. Claire stepped into the room and her blood ran cold. It wasn't a spare room. It was a woman's room. A dress was laid out on the bed, as if someone was planning to wear it. A book lay open on the nightstand, a ribbon marking the page. The scent of lavender was stronger here. My wife's things are still here, Caleb said from the doorway, his voice void of emotion. Emily won't part with them, neither will I. But that wasn't it. It wasn't sentiment. This room was a shrine, or a piece of evidence. He was showing it to her. Why? That afternoon, he tested her. Not with fences, not yet. He took her to the round pen where a gray mare, Bluebird, paced nervously. She hasn't let anyone saddle her since my wife. He trailed off. Try. It wasn't a request. It was an order. A test. Claire entered the pen. She didn't approach the horse. She just stood there, humming a low tune, a strange, sad melody from a life she'd left behind. The mare's ears twitched. It stopped pacing. It watched her. Slowly, Claire moved, not with the practiced ease of a ranch hand, but with the deliberate, silent grace of a predator. She had the bridle on before the horse even knew what was happening. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He said nothing. Later, while Emily struggled with her letters, Claire guided her hand. "Make the line strong," she said, "like a good fence. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out." Emily looked up at her, her young face serious. "That's what Ma used to say." From the doorway, Caleb watched, his expression unreadable. When Emily was focused on her work, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "She hasn't spoken of her mother in a year." Claire didn't look up. "Grief is a locked room. Sometimes you just need the right key." "And you've got a whole ring of 'em, don't you, Claire?" He shot back. Her hand froze. The air crackled with tension. This wasn't an interview. This was an interrogation. He knew she was more than she seemed. And she knew he was, too. They were two predators circling each other, trying to figure out who was the hunter and who was the prey. That night, she bolted the door to her room, the room that wasn't hers. She lay in the bed that belonged to a dead woman, surrounded by the ghost of her life. And for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the past catching up to her. She was terrified of the present. She was in a house with a man who knew she was a liar, who was testing her skills for some unknown purpose. And the most dangerous part? She didn't want to run. She wanted to know why. The storm that rolled in wasn't just a storm, it was a siege. Snow fell so thick and fast it erased the world, trapping the three of them in the small, tense house. The wind howled like a hungry animal, clawing at the walls. For 3 days, they were cut off. The work was brutal. Shoveling paths to the barn, feeding the stock, keeping the fire from dying. They worked in a tight, efficient silence. Claire moved with a purpose that surprised even herself. She rationed the food, stretching it, her mind clicking through calculations. She checked the windows, the doors, reinforcing them against the wind. These weren't the actions of a governess. They were the actions of someone who knew how to survive a lockdown. Caleb watched her every move. He never questioned her, he just watched. One night, the wind was so loud it sounded like the house was being torn apart. Emily, terrified, dragged her quilt into Claire's room. "Can I stay?" she whispered, her eyes huge in the flickering lamplight. Claire hesitated for only a second. She pulled back the covers. As the small girl burrowed against her, Claire felt a pang of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. A shadow fell across the doorway. It was Caleb. He stood there, just looking. His face, usually a mask of stone, was different. The storm had stripped something away. He wasn't looking at them as a father and a new governess. He was looking at Claire as if she were the ghost, as if she were his wife, come back from the dead. He didn't say a word. He just backed away, closing the door softly, leaving Claire alone with his daughter and the dead woman's lavender scent. The moment the storm broke, Caleb spoke. They were digging out a snow-choked trough, the sunlight on the fresh snow blinding. "You've held up," he said, not looking at her. "Hard work doesn't scare you." "Work keeps the ghosts quiet," she replied, her own words tasting like ash. He stopped and turned to face her, his breath a cloud in the frigid air. What ghosts, Claire? She shook her head. He took a step closer. You carry your secrets like a woodsman carries an axe, always ready to swing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. You're one to talk, she shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. This house is a tomb. Her things, her room. You're not mourning her, Caleb. You're preserving a crime scene. The words were out. They couldn't be taken back. Caleb's face went white. The muscle in his jaw jumped. She expected anger. She expected him to send her packing. Instead, a look of profound, terrible relief washed over his features. You see it too, he whispered, his voice cracking. He finally dropped the act. They said it was a fever, he said, his voice raw with a pain he'd held in for 3 years. But my wife, Sarah, she was a fighter. She wasn't the kind to just fade away. He looked at Claire, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. She was meeting someone in town that day, someone who was going to give her information. She came home pale, scared. She locked herself in her room. The next morning, she was gone. Claire felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Information about what? She asked, her own secrets screaming in her head. Caleb's gaze was piercing. She never said. But she left me this. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. A diary. He held it out to her. I can't make sense of it, he said. It's coded. But you. He looked at her hands, then back at her face. A woman who can calm a spooked horse without raising her voice, who can ration food for a siege, who sees a dead woman's room for what it is. You know how to read things that aren't written in plain English. This was the real test, the real reason he'd brought her here. He wasn't hiring a governess. He was recruiting a partner to solve his wife's murder. Claire stared at the diary. Her mind was a whirlwind. This was a trap. A beautiful, intricate, deadly trap. If she took that book, she was no longer just a woman hiding from her past. She was stepping into his. And his past, she suspected, was just as dangerous as her own. Why me? She asked, her voice tight. You could have hired a Pinkerton. I did, Caleb said, his voice turning to ice. He came out, asked some questions in town. 2 days later, they found his body downriver. The sheriff called it an accident. Of course he did. The people I'm dealing with, Caleb continued, his eyes never leaving hers. They're not common outlaws. They're powerful. They have money. They have the law in their pocket. They hide in plain sight. He looked pointedly at her worn satchel, just like you do. The accusation, the truth of it, hung between them. She had a choice. Run again, disappear into the next nameless town, or stay, open the book, and face whatever demons came crawling out. Her fingers, numb from the cold, reached out and took the diary. It felt heavy in her hand, heavy with secrets. That night, by the low light of a single lamp, she opened it. Caleb sat across from her, cleaning a rifle, his silence a heavy presence. Emily was asleep, safe from the adult world of codes and murder. The diary wasn't written in a simple substitution cipher. It was more complex, a book code mixed with personal symbols. It was brilliant and deeply personal. But Claire had seen codes like this before, in another life. A life where she wasn't Claire. She worked for hours, her mind sharp, focused. The world outside the small circle of lamplight ceased to exist. She wasn't just translating words. She was piecing together a life, Sarah Beckett's life, and her secrets. Sarah had been afraid, terrified. She wrote about land deals, about the railroad pushing through, about men from the East with ink-stained fingers and bottomless pockets. She wrote about bribes, about threats, about a man named Bram. Claire's blood turned to ice. Bram. The name from her own nightmares. The man she'd fled St. Louis to escape. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a web. and she and Sarah Beckett were just two flies caught in it. Suddenly a passage jumped out at her, a series of numbers, followed by a sketch of a willow tree. The willow tree. The one that gave the ranch its name. It was a map. Claire looked up, her heart pounding. Caleb had stopped cleaning his rifle. He was just watching her, his face a mask of anticipation. "Your wife," Claire said, her voice shaking. She didn't just have information. She had proof. She stood up, the diary clutched in her hand. "And I think I know where she hid it." Caleb was on his feet in an instant. He followed her out into the cold, moonlit night. The snow crunched under their boots. She led him to the oldest willow, the one whose branches bent all the way to the ground, creating a hidden space beneath. There, tucked into a hollow in the trunk, was a small oilskin-wrapped package. Caleb reached for it, his hands trembling. He tore it open. Inside wasn't a ledger, it wasn't documents. It was a set of engraved printing plates, the kind used to make money. Perfect, flawless plates for printing United States currency. Sarah Beckett hadn't just stumbled onto a conspiracy about land deals. She'd found the source of a massive counterfeiting operation, an operation run by the same powerful men who were building the railroad. The same men Claire had stolen from, the same men who wanted her dead. Caleb looked from the plates to Claire, his face pale in the moonlight. "My God," he whispered. "What have you gotten yourself into?" "Me?" Claire laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Caleb, this isn't my mess. It's ours. It's been ours since the moment you saw me in town." The truth was finally laid bare. He hadn't hired her because she was good with horses. He'd hired her because his murdered wife had described her. Because Sarah's last diary entry, the one Claire hadn't deciphered yet, was about her replacement. An expert who was coming to finish the job. An expert named Clara Donovan, the world tilted on its axis. "You knew," Claire whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You knew who I was." Caleb's face was grim. "I didn't know your name, not until now, but Sarah. She described you. She said a woman was coming, someone who could finish what she started. She said you'd know what to do." He'd been waiting for her. The job offer, the trial week, the tests. It was all a charade. He was trying to confirm if she was the one his wife had trusted with her life. "So what was this?" Claire demanded, gesturing back at the house, her voice rising. "A game? You let me believe I was hiding? You watched me, knowing my past was breathing down my neck?" "I had to be sure," he shot back, his own control finally snapping. "My wife is dead. I have a daughter to protect. I couldn't trust a ghost story. I had to see you. I had to know you were real." The raw pain in his voice cut through her anger. They stood there under the cold Montana moon, two strangers bound by a dead woman's secrets. He hadn't been testing her skills as a ranch hand. He'd been testing her skills as a spy. "What did I steal, Caleb?" she asked, the question she'd been too afraid to even ask herself. "What did they want back so badly?" He looked down at the printing plates in his hand. "They didn't want anything back," he said softly. "They wanted the other half." He explained, his voice low and urgent. Sarah had discovered the operation. The railroad tycoons were funding their expansion with counterfeit money, flooding the West with it, destabilizing the economy for their own gain. Sarah, working with a small group of Treasury agents, had managed to get close. She'd stolen one half of the plates, the face plates, but the back plates were still missing. And so was the master ledger, the one that detailed every transaction, every bribe, every murder. Claire felt her blood run cold. The satchel. Her satchel, the one she'd guarded so fiercely. It didn't just hold her escape money. The lining was thicker than it should be, heavier. She had been running all this way with a fortune in counterfeit plates and a death warrant stitched into the fabric of her bag. She hadn't just been an accountant's wife who stumbled onto a secret. She was part of the operation. She was the one who was supposed to deliver the plates to Sarah. But she had arrived too late. Sarah was dead, and Claire had walked right into the lion's den. Just then, a light flickered in the distance. Down the road, heading for the ranch, a lantern on a wagon. But it wasn't a neighbor. It was too late for a social call. Caleb saw it too. His body went rigid. "They're coming," he said, his voice a low growl. "It's Bram," Claire breathed, the name like poison on her tongue. "He must have tracked me from St. Louis." "He's not just coming for you," Caleb said, grabbing her arm, his fingers like iron bands. "He's coming to get these back. He's coming to wipe the board clean." He shoved the plates back into the oilskin wrap and thrust them at her. "Go, take Emily. There's a hidden cabin up in the north pasture. Sarah showed it to me. Take the horses and go, now." "What about you?" she cried, her heart seizing with a fear that had nothing to do with her own safety. "I'm going to buy you time," he said, his eyes blazing. "This is my land. They won't take another person I love from this place." He was going to face them alone. He was going to die, just like his wife. "No," Claire said, her voice shaking but firm. "No more running." She looked at the house, where his daughter slept, oblivious. She looked at this man, who had lost everything, who was willing to lose his life to protect a woman he barely knew. "Your wife trusted me to finish this," she said, her resolve hardening into steel. "And I will. With you." She pulled a small, wicked-looking blade from her boot. "They're not just coming for the plates, Caleb," she said, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. "They're coming for me, and I've been waiting for this reunion for a very long time." The hunter had just become the hunted, and High Meadow Ranch was about to become a killing ground. They didn't have time. The light was getting closer. "The barn," Caleb said, his mind already working, calculating angles, defenses. "It's more defensible than the house." "Emily," Claire said, her throat tight. "We have to wake her, quietly." They moved with a silent, synchronized urgency that spoke of shared stakes. Claire slipped into the house, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She gently woke Emily, her hand over the girl's mouth to stifle a cry. "We're going to play a game, sweet girl," Claire whispered, her voice miraculously steady. "A hiding game, in the hayloft. You have to be quieter than a mouse." Emily, eyes wide with a fear that understood this was no game, nodded bravely. Claire bundled her in a quilt and carried her out the back, into the freezing darkness. Caleb was already in the barn, positioning rifles at 2 different windows, creating a crossfire. He'd barred the main doors. "They'll expect us to be in the house," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "They'll try to burn us out." "Bram's not subtle," Claire agreed, settling Emily into a deep nest of hay in the furthest, darkest corner of the loft. "Stay here, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me, Emily?" The little girl nodded again, clutching a small wooden horse her mother had carved for her. Claire scrambled down the ladder. The wagon was getting closer. The crunch of its wheels on the frozen ground was audible now. "How many?" Claire asked, taking her position at the second window, the cold metal of the rifle a familiar, grim comfort in her hands. "Saw 3 when they crested the ridge," Caleb said. "But Bram's not a fool. He'll have more circling, waiting." The wagon stopped short of the house. Figures dismounted, dark shapes against the snow. One of them carried a torch, just as Caleb predicted. "Hold your fire," Caleb breathed. "Let them get closer. Let them commit." The men approached the house, moving with a swaggering confidence. They thought this was an easy job. Corner a lone woman, maybe a simple rancher. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the dark. One man kicked open the front door of the house. Another brought the torch to the porch curtains. "Now," Caleb said. 2 shots rang out, so close together they sounded like one. 2 of the dark shapes crumpled into the snow. The third, the one with the torch, yelled in surprise and pain, dropping the flame, which sputtered and died on the damp wood. He staggered back, clutching his shoulder. A voice roared out of the darkness. "Beckett, you coward! Send out the woman!" It was Bram. "She's not here!" Caleb yelled back, his voice echoing in the night. "And you're not leaving this valley alive!" A volley of gunfire erupted from the darkness around them. Bullets splintered the wood of the barn, whining through the air. They were surrounded. Claire kept her head down, her breathing even. This was her world. Chaos, violence, survival. "They're trying to pin us down," she said, reloading smoothly. "They'll send a man to the back." "I know," Caleb said. They fell into a rhythm, firing, reloading, moving between the windows. They were a surprisingly effective team. His raw strength and knowledge of the land, her cold, calculating precision. But there were too many. Suddenly, a new sound. The splintering of wood from the back of the barn. Someone was trying to break through the rear wall with an axe. "I'll go," Claire said, already moving. She handed Caleb her rifle. "Keep them busy at the front." She grabbed a pitchfork, its tines sharpened to wicked points, and melted into the shadows at the back of the barn. The chopping stopped. Silence. Then a section of the wall gave way, and a man's silhouette appeared in the opening. He stood there for a second, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. It was the last mistake he ever made. Claire moved like a phantom, the pitchfork a silent, deadly extension of her arm. The man made a gurgling sound and fell forward into the barn. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She grabbed his pistol and crept back to the front. But as she returned, she saw it. A new light, a small flickering flame near the base of the barn wall. They hadn't given up on fire. They'd just gotten smarter. They were trying to burn them alive, and Emily was trapped in the hayloft. "The fire!" Claire screamed, her voice raw with panic. Caleb saw it at the same time. He cursed, a low, vicious sound. The dry barn wood would go up like a tinderbox. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "We have to get out," he said, grabbing her arm. "Make a run for the creek bed. We can get cover there." "Emily!" "I'll get her," he said, already moving toward the ladder. "You lay down cover fire. Give me 30 seconds. Claire didn't argue. She turned back to the window, firing the rifle methodically into the darkness, aiming for muzzle flashes, forcing Bram's men to keep their heads down. Each shot was a second bought. Each second was a lifetime. She could hear Caleb scrambling up the ladder, the muffled sound of his voice speaking to Emily. She could smell the smoke now, thick and acrid. Flames began to lick up the outside wall. "Come on, Caleb, come on!" She fired her last round and grabbed the dead man's pistol. Just as she turned, Caleb was sliding down the ladder, Emily wrapped in the quilt and clinging to his back like a monkey. The little girl was terrified, but silent, brave. "Go!" Caleb yelled, pushing Claire toward the small side door. "Run for the willows! Don't stop!" He fired his own rifle, giving her cover. Claire burst out of the barn and into the chaos. The night was alive with gunfire. She ran, her lungs burning, the snow grabbing at her boots. She didn't look back. She trusted him. She reached the line of willows at the edge of the creek and threw herself into the frozen ditch, turning, pistol ready. She saw Caleb and Emily emerge from the smoke and flames, running low. They were almost there. Then a figure rose up from behind the water trough. It was Bram. He had a gun leveled, not at Caleb, but at the small, bundled shape on his back, at Emily. "Drop it, Beckett!" Bram snarled. Caleb froze. Time stopped. Claire had a clear shot, but it was risky. The distance, the poor light. If she missed, Emily was dead. If she did nothing, Emily was dead. "I said drop it!" Bram screamed, his voice cracking with rage. Caleb slowly, agonizingly, lowered his rifle to the ground. Bram grinned, a predator's smile. "Good choice. Now, the woman. Where is she?" From her hiding place, Claire's hand was steady. Her aim was true. She took a breath, held it. And in that split second, she realized something. Bram wasn't looking at Caleb anymore. He was looking past him, at the burning barn. A slow, horrifying realization dawned on him. The woman wasn't in the barn. She wasn't with Beckett. She was somewhere else. His eyes darted into the darkness, searching. Claire knew, with chilling certainty, that he was about to see her. But before he could, another shot rang out. Not from her pistol, from the hayloft of the burning barn. Bram staggered, a look of pure shock on his face. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest. He crumpled to the ground. Claire stared, bewildered, at the barn. A small figure was silhouetted against the flames in the hayloft opening. It wasn't a man. It was a ghost. A woman in a simple dress, a smoking rifle in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with fury. It was Sarah Beckett. She wasn't dead. The world stopped spinning. Caleb stared, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning, impossible hope. "Sarah?" The woman in the hayloft didn't answer. She was already reloading, her movements fluid and practiced. Another of Bram's men, drawn by the commotion, broke from cover. A second shot from the barn dropped him in his tracks. The remaining gunman, confused and suddenly leaderless, hesitated. That was all the opening Claire needed. "Now, Caleb!" she screamed. The spell was broken. Caleb scooped up his rifle and fired, while Claire opened up with her pistol. Caught between two fronts, the outlaws broke and ran, melting back into the darkness they came from. Silence fell, broken only by the roar and crackle of the burning barn. Caleb ran toward it, his voice choked with emotion. "Sarah!" The figure disappeared from the opening. A moment later, Sarah Beckett stumbled out of the side door, coughing from the smoke, but alive. Impossibly, miraculously, alive. She fell into Caleb's arms, and he held her like a man holding onto a miracle. Emily, who had scrambled from her father's back, just stood there, staring. "Ma?" she whispered. Claire watched, her pistol still held at the ready, her mind reeling. It didn't make sense. The funeral. The grave Mr. Cutter had mentioned. The last 3 years. It was all a lie. Sarah pulled back from Caleb, her eyes finding Claire in the darkness. There was no warmth in her gaze, no gratitude, only cold, hard calculation. "You have them?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy from the smoke. Claire instinctively clutched the satchel. "The plates," Sarah clarified, "and the ledger. Did you get them?" Caleb looked back and forth between the two women, confusion warring with joy on his face. "Sarah, what's happening? I thought you were dead." "I had to be, Cal," she said, her hand briefly touching his cheek. "It was the only way to protect you and Emily, the only way to get close enough." She turned back to Claire. "Bram was just a hired thug. The man behind it all, the one who runs the whole operation, is here, in Willow Creek." This was the final twist, the one that snapped everything into place. "Who?" Claire asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The one person no one would ever suspect," Sarah said, her eyes glittering with a 3-year-old vengeance. "The man who controls the flow of information, the man who reported his own agent, a Pinkerton, accidentally, drowned. The telegraph, clicking and clicking, sending messages, receiving orders." "It's the telegrapher," Claire breathed. "He's the kingpin." "And tonight," Sarah said, a grim smile touching her lips, "we're going to deliver a message of our own." She wasn't a victim. She was a hunter. She hadn't been hiding. She had been waiting. Waiting for the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Waiting for Claire, the woman she'd arranged to have brought here all along. The final confrontation didn't happen on a dusty street at high noon. It happened in the quiet, sterile office of the Willow Creek telegraph station. They walked in, the 3 of them, Claire, Caleb, and the ghost of Sarah Beckett, just as the sun was beginning to touch the eastern peaks. The telegrapher, a small man with ink-stained fingers named Elias Finch, looked up from his machine, his eyes widening in panic when he saw Sarah. "You!" he stammered, scrambling back from his chair. Me, Sarah said, leveling her rifle at him. The ghost you made. Claire laid her satchel on the counter. The weight of the plates inside made a solid, satisfying thud. It's over, Elias, Claire said. We have the plates. We have the ledger. Finch's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. There was none. You don't understand, he pleaded. They'll kill me. They'll kill all of you. They can try, Caleb said, his voice a low growl as he stood beside his wife, his family finally reunited. But this valley is done being scared of you. Sarah explained it all. She was a treasury agent. She'd been deep undercover, getting close to Finch's operation. When she realized he'd made her, she faked her death, with the help of the town doctor and Mr. Cutter from the store, the only two people she could trust. She'd been living in the hidden cabin, watching, waiting for the backup agent, Claire, to arrive with the other half of the evidence. Bram's arrival had forced her hand. She'd been hiding in the loft the entire time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finch, seeing it was hopeless, began to talk. He laid out the entire conspiracy. The railroad barons, the corrupt politicians, a web of greed and power that stretched all the way to Washington. And he tapped it all out on his telegraph, sending a full confession, with Sarah dictating, to the regional treasury office. Justice, in the end, didn't come from the barrel of a gun. It came through the clicking of a wire. The sun was fully up when they walked out of the office, leaving Finch in the custody of a stunned but resolute town sheriff. The air was clean and cold, smelling of pine and melting snow. The barn was a smoking ruin. The house was still standing, damaged but whole, like them. Caleb put one arm around Sarah and the other around Claire. Emily held both their hands. They weren't just two broken halves anymore. They were something new, something stronger, forged in fire and secrecy. What now? Caleb asked, looking at the two formidable women who had turned his world upside down. Sarah smiled, a real warm smile for the first time. Now, we rebuild the barn. Claire looked out at the high meadow, at the sun catching the snowy peaks. She had come here looking for a place to hide, a place to be safe. She hadn't found safety. She had found something better. A home, a family, a fight worth fighting. Her running was finally over. The wind still blew across the plains, but it didn't sound like a knife anymore. It sounded like a promise. If you enjoyed this story, and you believe that sometimes the greatest treasures are found when we stop running, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got another incredible story of courage and destiny on your screen right now. Your support, through likes, comments, and super chats, allows us to keep the campfire burning and the stories coming. Thanks for listening.